My husband laughed when I walked into that courtroom alone. Not a quiet, private laugh. A full leaning back in his chair laugh. The kind that made his lawyer touch his arm to settle him down. His mother was sitting 2 rows behind him, and she pressed her lips together in that way she always did when she thought she'd already won something. I was 31 years old, wearing the blazer I'd bought at a Reitman sale 3 years ago, carrying a manila folder with tabs I'd made myself using sticky notes from a Dollarama pack. I had no briefcase. I had no legal team. I had a travel mug of Tim Hortons coffee that had gone cold on the drive over, and I had 7 years of my life stuffed into that folder. My husband, I'll call him my husband until the court said otherwise, had hired one of the most expensive family lawyers in the city. I knew this because I used to manage our household accounts. I knew the retainer he paid her was more than what I made in 4 months at my last job, before he asked me to stop working so I could be home when his mother visited from Kelowna. That was 6 years ago. 6 years I had been the person who made sure the house ran, who remembered which recycling week was which, who called the insurance company and sat on hold for 40 minutes when the basement flooded, who drove 3 hours to pick up his father from the airport in January because the roads were bad and he didn't want to ask anyone else. I did not think of these things as sacrifices at the time. I thought of them as the shape of the life we'd agreed to together. I was wrong about what we'd agreed to. I found out on a Tuesday in March. The snow was doing that particular thing it does in late winter in Ontario, half melted and refrozen, so the driveway was all ridges and slick patches. I'd been to the grocery store. I came home with 2 bags of groceries, had to make 2 trips because the bags were heavy and the ice was bad. And when I came inside, my husband was standing in the kitchen with his phone face down on the counter and an expression I had never seen on him before. Not guilt, exactly. More like the face of someone who had already made a decision and was just now having to announce it. "We need to talk," he said. I set the groceries on the counter. I started taking things out: milk, yogurt, the good Dijon mustard he liked. "I've been talking to a lawyer," he said. I put the mustard down. "I want a divorce." I remember thinking, with the strange clarity that shock sometimes brings, the yogurt needs to go in the fridge. I put the yogurt in the fridge. "Okay," I said. And then, because I needed to sit down, I sat at the kitchen table and I looked at him and I said, "Can you tell me why?" What he told me over the next 40 minutes was that he had been unhappy for a long time, that he felt we had grown apart, that he had met someone. He said someone as if that word was soft enough that it wouldn't land the way it did, and that he had known for a while that this was coming. What he didn't say was that he had already spoken to a financial advisor about restructuring his business accounts. I found that out later. What he didn't say was that he'd had a lawyer on retainer for 8 weeks already. I found that out later too. What he did say, as I sat at that kitchen table with my cold hands in my lap, was this: "You should know that the business assets are protected, and honestly, you can't afford a lawyer. I don't say that to be cruel. I'm just being realistic with you. This will go a lot smoother if you just sign what I have drawn up." He slid a document across the table. I did not pick it up. I want to say I was brave in that moment. I want to say I stood up and told him exactly what I thought of him. But the truth is, I sat there for a long time after he left the room and I cried, and then I made myself a tea, and then I cried some more. I called my sister, who drove over from Barrie in under 2 hours, and sat on my couch and held my hand and said absolutely nothing, which was exactly what I needed. Her name is Josephine. She's 4 years older than me, and she has never, not once in her life, been intimidated by anyone. I watched her pick up the document my husband had left on the table, read it with the focused expression of someone doing a tax return, and then set it back down very carefully. "Don't sign that," she said. "I know," I said. "No, I mean really don't. There's a clause on page 4 that waives your right to claim on the pension." She had caught that in under 10 minutes. She works as a paralegal. I had not known that she was a paralegal when I married my husband. Or rather, I had known, but I had not understood what it meant, in practical terms, to have a sister who spent her days reading legal documents the way other people read novels. She noticed everything. She caught what you weren't meant to catch. She looked at me across the coffee table. "Do you trust me?" she said. "Yes," I said. "Then here's what we're going to do." What we did was not dramatic. It was not a montage. It was months of evenings at my sister's kitchen table, her walking me through the Family Law Act, through equalization payments, through what my contributions to the household actually meant in legal terms. She could not represent me. Her role didn't extend to that, but she could prepare me. She could explain what each document meant. She could tell me what questions to ask and when to stay quiet. We requested full financial disclosure from my husband's legal team. They dragged their feet. This is apparently common. We filed a motion to compel. My sister drafted it. I filed it myself. The look on his lawyer's face during that first procedural appearance, I won't forget it. There was a flicker of something. Not quite surprise, more like recalibration. Like she had expected something softer and had to adjust. My husband did not look at me during that appearance. He sat very straight and looked at the wall slightly to the left of the judge's head. His mother had come. She sat in the gallery wearing a cream-colored blazer and a look of immovable certainty. She caught my eye once and gave me the same small, closed-mouth smile she had given me when I told her I'd decorated the guest room for her visits. Tolerant, patient. The smile of someone who believes the inconvenience is temporary. I looked away. The financial disclosure, when it finally came, was interesting. My sister sat with it for 2 evenings. On the 3rd evening, she called me and said, "His business structure changed significantly 18 months ago." "Meaning," I said. "Meaning there are assets that existed before that restructuring that don't appear in what they've submitted." She paused. "I think he moved things. I want to be clear, I am not a lawyer. I do not know in technical terms exactly what my husband had done, or whether what he did was illegal or simply aggressive financial planning. What I know is what my sister told me. And what she told me was that the picture being presented did not match the picture she could see the outlines of. She had a contact. A forensic accountant she had worked with before on a file. He agreed to look at what we had. His name was Mr. Okonkwo, and he was the quietest, most thorough person I had ever watched do anything. He sat at my sister's kitchen table and went through 3 years of documents and said approximately 40 words. Then he wrote a report. That report was 9 pages long. I read it 3 times. Even understanding only a portion of it, I understood enough. There were assets that had not been disclosed. There were transfers that had occurred in the window between when husband first contacted a lawyer and when he told me he wanted a divorce. The timing was not incidental. My sister submitted the report to the court. The day of the actual hearing arrived in October. The leaves had turned and most of them had fallen, and the parking lot outside the courthouse had that grey-swept look that Ontario gets in the weeks before the first real snow. I sat in my car for a few minutes before I went in. I drank the rest of my coffee. I thought about the kitchen table where I had sat and cried in March. I thought about every evening at my sister's table, every document I'd read, every question I had asked and had answered. I went inside. My husband was already there with his lawyer. His mother was in the gallery again. He was wearing a suit I recognized. Charcoal gray with a fine stripe, the one he wore when he wanted to seem authoritative. He had a leather portfolio on the table in front of him. He looked like the more prepared person in the room. I set down my manila folder with the sticky note tabs. His lawyer glanced at it, just once. Then she looked away. The hearing began. The judge, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses pushed up on her head, reviewed the submissions. There were several exchanges I will not recount here because the legal specifics are not the point. The point is what happened when the forensic accounting report came up. My husband's lawyer objected to its inclusion. She argued procedural grounds. The judge listened. Then she asked a question about the timeline of the asset transfers. She asked it quietly, almost conversationally, directed at my husband's counsel. There was a pause. It was not a long pause, maybe 4 seconds. But in a courtroom, 4 seconds of silence from a lawyer is an eternity. The lawyer said something about context and further documentation. The judge took off her glasses and set them on the desk in front of her. She looked at my husband's lawyer. Then she looked at my husband. She said, "Counsel, I'm looking at a transfer dated 11 months prior to the date of this petition. Can you help me understand the business rationale?" The leather portfolio did not open. I looked at my husband. His jaw was set. He was still looking at the wall to the left of the judge's head. But something had changed in the set of his shoulders. They were slightly higher. The posture of a person who is waiting for something to pass. It did not pass. The judge took a recess. When we came back, there was an additional order on the table, a requirement for further disclosure, expanded to include records from the 18 months preceding the divorce filing. My husband's lawyer did not look happy. She looked like someone who had been handed more work than she had anticipated and was calculating something. My husband looked at me for the first time that day. I don't know what he expected to see. Maybe what he'd seen 7 months ago. Someone crying at a kitchen table. Someone overwhelmed. Someone who'd been told flatly that she couldn't afford to fight. I looked back at him. I didn't smile. I didn't look away. His mother in the gallery was not smiling either. I will not pretend the process ended there. It did not. There was more paperwork, more waiting, more evenings at my sister's table with bad tea and highlighted documents. The law does not move quickly, and it does not move smoothly, and there were moments in the months that followed where I was so tired that I sat in the parking lot of a Loblaws and just stared at the steering wheel for 10 minutes before I could make myself go in. But the further disclosure was submitted, and Mr. Okonkwo was asked to review that too. And the picture it painted was one the court found. I will use the word the judge used concerning. The equalization settlement that had been proposed in March, the one on the document my husband slid across the kitchen table, the one with the clause on page 4 that waived my pension rights, that number changed significantly. My sister drove over the evening after we got the final order. She brought a bottle of wine and a grocery store cake that said congratulations, in loopy blue frosting, the kind that's meant for birthdays or graduations. She put it on my kitchen counter, the same counter where I had unpacked the groceries in March, where I had stood and put the Dijon mustard down when he told me. We ate the cake. It was very sweet, and the frosting was the kind that leaves a film on your teeth, and it was exactly right. "You did that," she said. "I helped, but you did that." "Mr. Okonkwo did a lot," I said. "He found the evidence. You showed up," she said. "That's not nothing." What I think about now, when I think about that year, is not the courtroom moment. Everyone wants the courtroom moment to be the story. And it was something, I won't say it wasn't. The look on my husband's face, his shoulders up around his ears, the silence from his very expensive lawyer. That mattered. It landed in me in a way that took me a while to even identify. Not triumph exactly, something quieter, like the closing of a door. But the real thing, the thing that actually changed me, happened earlier. It happened somewhere around the 4th or 5th evening at my sister's table, somewhere in the stretch of July when the process felt endless, and the walls of the house still had the shadows of picture frames we'd taken down, the lighter rectangles where the paint hadn't faded. I had asked my sister a question about equalization payments, and she had explained the answer. And then I had asked a follow-up question, and she had looked at me and said, "You already know this. Think about what you just asked me." And I had thought about it, and I had worked out the answer. And she had said, "Right." That was the thing, not the moment in the courtroom, not the forensic accounting report, not the judge's question that a lawyer couldn't answer. It was that Tuesday evening in July at a kitchen table in Bari when I realized I had understood something. He told me I couldn't afford to fight. He was wrong about what I had. He thought he was describing money. He was actually describing me. I closed the folder with the sticky note tabs and I drove home in the dark, and the highway was empty, and the fields on either side were just shapes in the night, and I thought, I am going to be okay. Not fine, not fixed, not healed yet, just okay, just moving forward, just still here. That was enough. That night, that was everything. I keep coming back to the moment my husband slid that document across the kitchen table. Not the courtroom, not the judge's question. That kitchen table in March, with the groceries still sitting out and the Dijon mustard I'd just put down. He thought he was telling me something about money. He thought you can't afford to fight was a factual statement, a description of reality, something I would absorb and then comply with. And for a few hours, sitting there with my cold hands and my cold tea, I almost did. I almost picked up that pen. What stopped me wasn't courage. Not at first. It was Josephine reading page 4 with her paralegal eyes and saying very quietly, "Don't sign that." That was the first piece, someone in my corner who knew what I didn't and was willing to sit at a kitchen table with me for months and close that gap. I think about that a lot now, about what it actually costs a person to deceive someone who trusts them. My husband had spent months preparing before he ever said the word divorce out loud. 8 weeks with a lawyer before he told me. Financial restructuring before the conversation. He thought about it carefully, strategically, and the strategy depended entirely on me not being able to think carefully back. That's the part that took me a long time to sit with. Not the betrayal of the marriage. The specific calculation that I could be out Minerve because I wouldn't know how. The assumption that I was someone things happened to, not someone who could figure things out. He was wrong. Not because I was secretly brilliant or secretly powerful. Because I was willing to learn. Because I asked my sister a question and then asked a follow-up question and then worked out the answer myself and kept doing that week after week until I understood enough to show up. Mr. Okonkwo didn't say much. He sat at Josephine's table and went through documents the way someone lays out a puzzle, methodically, without drama, and what he found was the shape of choices my husband had made. Choices have a way of leaving records. What you move when you move it, why it happened to move in that particular 8-week window. Those things don't disappear just because you'd prefer they would. The something I believe now that I didn't have language for then. The way you treat someone when you think they have no power is a very accurate picture of your actual character. My husband wasn't cruel to me in the early years because he was hiding it. He was decent when decency cost him nothing. The moment I became an inconvenience, the moment he needed me to simply accept what he'd prepared and step aside, that's when I found out who he actually was. And I found out who I was too. Not someone who fights loudly. Not someone who had a plan from the beginning. Someone who, when it mattered, was willing to keep showing up. To read the next document. To ask the next question. To drive home on a dark highway in July and decide quietly that I was going to be okay. The equalization number changed. The pension clause didn't get signed away. The things he had moved were found. None of that happened because I was powerful. It happened because I was honest, I was careful, and I didn't stop. That's the whole thing. That's all it was.